Gray Space Podcast.
Welcome to the Gray Space Podcast. My name is Luke, and in this discussion, in this episode, Matthew Lewis and I are going to be talking about the film Enemy. So obviously I would recommend watching the film before you listen to the discussion. However, if you don't have time, it's okay. We are doing something a little bit different in this one. At the beginning, we're going to summarize the film, basically talk about what happens. So at least you'll have that as a kind of reference point if you haven't seen it, so that then the discussion that follows makes sense. We're going to be getting into some mythological ideas as well as some Jungian ideas like the shadow and the anima and how those relate to the film, sort of like we did in our previous discussion about the film Her. So you could sort of see this as a part 2 discussion of those ideas, but more of a darker side of the coin. Not that the conversation is dark, but that it is definitely a darker film. So anyway, I hope that you enjoy it. If you have thoughts you'd like to share, definitely leave a comment. And without further delay, let's get into the discussion. I think at the start, the best thing to do, as we discussed, would be to just sort of kind of go through it as a summary. Not in too much detail, but just sort of talk about what happens in the movie. Yeah. As you suggested. This is your suggestion. I think it's a great suggestion. It's one of your best.
I got one.
This is the first and the best. Because for anyone watching this who doesn't have the energy to watch Enemy, shame on you. But I get it. We have limited time. So we'll try to just talk through it very simply so that you have a picture, so that then the conversation that follows isn't nonsense. Because in our previous discussions, for anyone who hadn't seen Her or Joker, which we had talked about before, it might be nonsense. And I think it would be pretty easy to tune out. So we're lowering the threshold here a little bit, and that's, I think, a good thing. Doing it for the people.
We'll see how it goes. We can change it later.
We can change it later. Yeah.
We could start talking about James Joyce only later and alienate everybody.
Yeah, and then we could start the podcast by talking about a niche concept of Carl Jung for 20 minutes right at the start. Let's alienate as many people as possible as quickly.
Let's do that
possible.
again.
Yeah, let's do that one more time. Okay, well, with that disclaimer, let's just try to. I don't know how we can start, but maybe I can just sort of begin, and then you can tell me what I have wrong or flesh it out a little bit for me.
Well, so okay, what if we? So what if I start with the idea of why I thought we should watch it again, and then you give the synopsis?
Right, because it is your suggestion. You're the one who said let's watch Enemy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I concede to you.
So, thanks. So I went over to a friend's house about to hang out, and I noticed that he was watching Enemy, and I saw this movie a long time ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and it just kind of took me by. It was on streamings, and I think it kind of took me by surprise. It's one of those movies where it's like, you know that there's something to it, and you can't quite get it out of your head, and you know that there's stuff to keep thinking about and symbolism and all that. And then I watched this explanation video by this guy named Chris Stuckman. It was Chris Stuckman's Enemy Explained. And so I watched it and I was like, oh my God, the symbolism and all this. And then I just kept thinking about it, and I never watched it again. And then I went over to my friend's house, and he was actually about 20 minutes into it. And I was like, man, do you mind start that movie over? Because I've wanted to watch it so badly since the last time I saw it, read all this Campbell and Jung stuff. And so I think it'll make more sense. So he was like, yeah, we'll start it over. So we started it over, and then the first 2 images.
It's a good friend.
Yeah, I've got a handful for sure. He started it over, and then the first 2 images, or the first 2 females you're introduced to, are mothers, and they're mother images or mother ideas, and it's like, oh my God, this is gonna be great. Everything's gonna make sense now.
You love mothers.
Yeah. And so then after finishing watching it, it just seemed there were so many parallels to the discussion that you and I just had about her, with the anima, the animus, the container, the contained, the idea of the role of the mother and father in developmental psychology, and then symbolism throughout history and all that kind of stuff.
Watch
and
our
it seemed,
podcast if you haven't seen that, people.
yeah, and I'm going to use this analogy because I think it's funny. To me, her was like a Sufjan Stevens cover of Jungian ideas, and then Enemy was like the Tool cover of Jungian ideas. So,
Interesting.
what her is more. It's not dark. I mean, it has dark aspects to it. It's definitely you deal psychologically with difficult
It's in depth,
things.
but it's not dark. Yeah. It's heavy,
Yeah.
but it's not dark. It's heavy. Heavy is the word.
Exactly. And whereas Enemy is definitely more dark and
Dark yellow, in fact.
Yeah, for sure. He loves that color. I have an idea why he loves that color in Blade Runner, which we'll talk about at some point. But yeah, Enemy seemed to be the dark sibling counterpart to her. And so then it just seemed like a great reason for it seemed like it would be a great companion piece to her to kind of get to talk about two different flavors of those ideas, so that if people watch these, and they can hopefully go watch the movies and kind of see the contrast and take on
The
Jungian
other side of
ideas.
the coin. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah,
for those of you who haven't watched Her, the main ideas we talked about, sort of the main theme that ran throughout that conversation about the movie, is the idea of one person in a marriage, or let's say a relationship or a marriage, being the container of the other, in the sense that maybe not in terms of their intellect, but there are maybe limitations of one person, so they exist sort of in the world of another. And then if the one who's the contained starts to grow or develop, then they might expand outside or beyond the container in the marriage. And so at that point, and this is what we talked about in Her, there has to be sort of a new deal. Either they become separate in their own way and sort of respect each other as maybe separate containers, or the contained explodes and transcends the container, and the relationship ends in probably divorce or something like that, which is what happens in Her. So that's the idea, just sort of, in case we reference it many times later. That's the basic idea. Yes.
and what about the anima idea as well?
You want to talk about that in 3 words or less?
Yeah, just I can sum it up. In Her, Samantha. So there's Theodore, the main character, and then the OS that is created from his words. And Samantha is essentially kind of his anima, sort of this idealized female in a sense, because she's this sort of perfect complement for what he thinks he needs at the beginning. She grows out of that, but at the beginning it seems like that's his anima. And then the whole reason she comes into being the way that she does is because of the question that is asked to him when the OS is being generated, which is, how is your relationship with your mother? So we've got that whole mother and anima idea in Her, and we've definitely got it
Right.
in Enemy, it seems.
A simple way to maybe talk about the Her would be if your eyeballs had projector lights in them, and you could project outside of yourself ideas from your subconscious. The anima would be the female that is the projection on the wall, not only in appearance, but from your sort of unconscious or your subconscious of what the perfect complement to your masculinity is as a male, right?
Yeah. It's like the the ideal feminine, right?
Yeah.
So,
but that's not the same for everybody. That's different depending on your own sort of the form of your own masculine landscape then creates to complement it the anima,
which must include good feet.
Yes, or a red station wagon.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So
We'll talk about that later. Yeah, so
What happens in Enemy? Do you want to
Sure, I can
give a
try.
synopsis?
Well, I can try. I can only try my best. So there's a university professor. His name is Adam. He has a wife. His wife's name is Helen. Adam and Helen. And he is at the very beginning, I think importantly, talking about totalitarian regimes and how they're all based on control. They're all based on, they derive their power from controlling the population. And he also mentions a quote of Karl Marx via Hegel, which is something like disasters or historical calamities happen twice. The first time is a tragedy. The second time is a farce. It's actually a quote of Karl Marx talking about, making a commentary of Hegel. And that is definitely important later in the film, for sure. But we can talk about that later. Okay, so then we see him with his mistress, and it seems like their relationship is completely physical. After they're done doing the deed, she leaves every time, and he seems to have a very depressing life. Everything is yellow, everything is dark. He seems like he's completely sort of isolated from reality. When his colleague talks to him, it's almost like he can't even function in the conversation, barely, emotionally. So he seems very subdued, very depressed, and has this single sort of sexual relationship. His job, he doesn't seem that interested in that. Then he encounters a movie and sees in the movie someone who looks exactly like him, sort of a doppelganger of himself. And he becomes completely fascinated with this doppelganger, makes a phone call and talks to the wife of the doppelganger, and then later eventually encounters the doppelganger, and they find out that they are in somehow the same person. We'll talk about that too, but they're presented as two separate people with the exact same scar, the exact same features, everything is exactly the same beard, totally the same. The interesting thing there is when Adam is dealing with the doppelganger, Anthony, who is an actor and has a cool motorcycle helmet, the kind of
cool
motorcycle
jacket.
Yeah, the kind of motorcycle jacket a 9-year-old would buy. Adam's hands shake, and he's very tense. He sort of worships, and his eyes light up, but at the same time, he can barely open his mouth to speak, as though you were around a celebrity, and you could barely get your sentences out. Right? What?
You got incredibly meta. It's as though Jake Gyllenhaal playing this character is playing a character who's nervous being around and a celebrity who is played by Jake Gyllenhaal
let's get
playing
into
a celebrity.
All right. Well, but that's definitely his characteristic. His demeanor around his doppelganger is willing inferiority, accepting immediately that the doppelganger is superior because he's cool. He's an actor. He's got a cool motorcycle. It's just making my hands shake thinking about it. So they after they encounter each other, it eventually works out that the doppelganger has a child on the way. His wife is pregnant with their child.
The motorcycle guy,
Mr. Cool, the actor, has a wife with a child on the way, and he has had affairs in the past, and she mentions that. And so they're dealing with this thing. Then somehow he figures out how to blackmail, kind of, or pressure Adam into letting him, Anthony, Mr. Cool, have sex with Adam's girlfriend. In the film, it's presented as his girlfriend, or his. It's not a mistress. It's presented as his girlfriend. Okay. So then they go off to a hotel. She notices his he must have gone to Puerto Rico or something because he must have a tan because the wedding ring, there's a white line there. She notices it. They get in a fight. They're on the way home in the car, get in a car accident. They die. And then Adam is at the same time simultaneously at Anthony's wife's house.
The pregnant lady.
And she seems to notice that something is different she seems aware of his state. Right? By this time, I don't know about you, but it's pretty obvious to me that we're watching a movie about one couple, and that's it. There is no doppelganger. There's a man who's married to a lady who's pregnant, and that's it. Or maybe the whole movie is in his subconscious. It doesn't really. I don't think it really matters. We can talk about that too. But
yeah, it was all in Joaquin Phoenix's head the whole time.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, there's a moment of tenderness where he sits down on the bed with her, and there's I think the sort of when there's a sex scene in a movie that's not completely passionate and it's got love in it as well. You know, when you see that, you feel kind of warm. You realize that this is an act of this is something to make you happy. This is a good thing. It feels like a good thing, which is very different from Anthony having sex with this girlfriend, right? It's a very different. That's a completely passionate act. This is sort of a loving act. It's a very different form of sex when you see this. She has sex with him. So okay, so that's what happens. Now underneath there's this awareness that Anthony has been going to this club where sexy ladies with sexy feet step on spiders, and it's a club where weird things happen. They step on spiders with their stiletto heels. We see that at the very beginning of the movie. Well, there's a key to this club, and when Adam goes to the apartment of Anthony's wife, the pregnant lady, they have sex. There's a sort of tender moment, and then he gets the new key to this weird sex club with the spiders, and says, after he gets the key to his wife, after they had this sort of beautiful moment in their relationship,
conciliatory reconciliation.
Conciliation it's a good moment. It feels good. Then he says, after he gets this new key to this sex club, I'm going out later. That moment seems somehow to trigger something. Something flips and something clicks. He walks into the room where she is, and she is now a gigantic spider huddled up against the corner. Not a sort of menacing spider, a spider to be feared, but a spider afraid or cornered or not in a good position. And the look on his face is also not fear. The look on his face is complicated, very complicated, I think. And that's where the movie ends. That's the story. Did I miss anything?
No, that was great. I think his face at the end is resignation to here we go again, kind of,
right,
which is exactly what the movie is about. So do you want to just kind of walk through it? Because I think...
Well, yeah, we can do that. You mean walk through the whole film in sequence? I don't think it necessarily has to happen in sequence. I have some... maybe we can just go through some questions. I've got some I've kind of broken it down. Maybe we can talk about the pieces. So hopefully the general idea, the structure of it is clear, and then we can sort of dive into it as needed. But
sounds
before
good.
before we do that, did I miss anything? Is there anything that's missing? Because you watched it twice in a 24-hour period.
I think so. So this is I think I've seen it 4 times.
I've seen it once. I should watch it again.
Yeah. Start with the questions. Let's do that. Sounds good.
All right. So I want to make sure we're on the same page about it's just no case to be made that this is a story about 2 guys who look the same. That's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. There's no case to be made for that. I don't know if some people would say that, but it's not that. And there are very clear cues. He answers the phone right after he leaves frame. She calls her husband, and when she's with Adam at his workplace, he stands up and leaves, right? And she calls her husband, and the phone is answered right after he's out of view, a millisecond after he's out of view. You never see the 2 of them together with anybody else. You only see the 2 of them together. When they meet, bizarrely, they meet in a hotel room, which is a very strange place to meet. Why would they meet in a hotel room? Because nobody sees them.
The same one that he takes the paramour, the French Canadian, to like so when the Breezeway Inn.
Yeah.
So when he takes his girlfriend on a little vacation or a little romantic getaway, he takes her to that same
place.
motel where they met. Yeah.
Interesting.
So
And yeah, so it's pretty clear that this is, but it's not to say that he's sort of, it's a Fight Club situation where there's this imaginary guy who's punching him in the face. It's not that either. This is probably a story about what goes on deep in the psyche of some men who are in a serious relationship about to have a baby. I think that's what this is. And so it doesn't really matter that the line between real, not real, I think is kind of irrelevant. That sometimes upsets me when a film is presented as, ooh, this is a really interesting story, like Pan's Labyrinth. Oh, actually, none of it was real. It was a fantasy. Or Sucker Punch. They're just dreaming. Why would you tell a story like that? Because you're sort of just saying gotcha at the end. But this isn't like that. This is from the beginning trying to tell a story about the psyche of this type of person, and it's not about, it doesn't have to be about, what this is real and this is not real. It's not important.
Yeah, and it seems like it's the lines between the fantasy and reality in this movie are they're not really clear cut. There's never a move made to let you know that this is reality and this is not reality. And it's great, but it kind of exists in that dream consciousness state where good myth, good stories, effective and moving stories come from.
And I don't know about you, but I had no hang-ups about that. I right from the start, the tone, maybe it was the yellowness, just sort of immediately accepted that it's not important. I wasn't trying to figure out, oh, this must be real and this must not be real. I wasn't even trying to figure that stuff out because that would be a waste of time. We probably wasted too much time establishing it in the conversation. Jeez, I feel guilty.
Well, what if we start with maybe, unless you were going to bring up a question specifically.
I was going to ask you. I was going to start with the anima. We're going to start with that.
Yeah.
Why don't we get into that? Because we've talked about what that means. So.
Yeah, and we could break down sort of those big Jungian archetypes. So anima, shadow, and then the mother stuff.
We've talked about what that means. So let's now sort of relate it to the film.
Yeah. So if we're going to start with
anima, shadow, container, contained.
I want to start with the collective unconscious to kind of establish that we're talking about Jungian ideas, because it's also the first scene in the movie. So in that first scene in the movie, we've got Jake Gyllenhaal's character, which if you watch it, that character has the wedding ring on. So I don't know if that's before the separation with the estrangement from the wife, or if is it Adam or is it Anthony when he's left-handed, when he's down there in the basement? Yeah. So anyway, first scene, would it be like they're kind of separated? They're living apart.
Are they?
Well, Adam's living in that apartment, and the mother calls at the beginning and says, "Thanks for showing me a new place."
Oh yeah. Anyway, let's not get hung up on that stuff. We just said we're not going to do that.
So it starts off. There's a phone call from the mother, and there's a pan over of the city, and then we see a really quick image of Adam Anthony's wife naked on the bed, and she's pregnant. So we've got two mother images to begin with, and then immediately we go to this scene of what I think is the collective unconscious, where Adam Anthony, Jake Gyllenhaal, is walking in this subterranean corridor, and he has his key in his hand, and he goes in, he unlocks this door. And when he goes in, that's when we get to the weird fetish sex club. And what happens in there is there's this woman on a chair, and she's masturbating, and there's all of these sort of older men sitting around watching it. They're not participating at all. They're just watching this thing happen. And then Adam comes in.
With great fascination.
Yeah, and they're very sort of somber. They don't really show excitement or disdain, pleasure, pain. They just, right?
Somber doesn't. No, I would say I would say they're completely absorbed in it, but not in a way, not in a sort of frivolous, it's not a ping pong show in Thailand. It's not like that. It's somehow it's a much deeper act that they're watching, and they're completely in it, but maybe it's not registering on their faces because it's happening far below the surface of facial expression.
Yeah, and it seems to be what I took it as, the thing they're watching is what they are men who have never they've kept this idea of what the feminine is, what feminine sexuality is, and they've never really interacted with it because it's at a distance. So they don't have any intimate knowledge of this thing that they've idealized. And so
idealized?
Well, it seems like what
they have a conception of it. Idealize tells me that they have some sort of reverence for the feminine. I don't see it like that. It's more disdain for the true feminine, and objectification of certain aspects of the feminine. And anyway, continue.
Yeah, and I said ideal because it's sort of their dark subterranean ideal. It's not correct. It's not. It's not complete for sure. It's just one aspect that's totally divorced from a complete idea of feminine. So, and it seems like the reason why we've got all these older guys down there is that this is sort of an ancient idea. It's existed for a long time, and the people that are still beholden to it tend to be, I guess, I don't know, maybe older men who have never experienced it, who have never had to confront reality. And so, and it seems like, well, then why is our hero there? Well, maybe the track of his life is grooming him to become one of the other men in that circle.
He's an initiate of sorts.
Yeah, and so we see him go and he join these guys watching this charade, and then this sort of, not charade, but this thing happened in front of them, and then sort of a ritual happens where two women walk out. One of them disrobes, the other one puts a silver tray on the ground, removes the cover, and the spider crawls out. And then the foot fetish comes in, where we've got the naked woman, she puts her shoe on top of the spider like she's going to crush it. And
it's not a shoe, it's a stiletto.
Yeah, it's a big ass stiletto. And so,
it's not a shoe.
Yeah, she's got it in her hand and she's just going to whack it.
Yeah, that is the wrong image.
And the shot we see is
very methodical, very, very, as you said, sort of ritualistic.
Yeah, and the shot we see of her, we never see their faces. The females in this scene are never given sort of an identity, a face, eyeballs to connect with. They're always in shadow or obscured. And the shot we see of the woman with the stiletto is from the ground, and we see it up as though she's a giant woman, and she's going to crush this spider. And I think that female is the anima, is this, all these guys are projecting their sort of ideal, how they idealize or conceptualize the female. And so all of the females on stage are the anima, and they're crushing spiders. And the spider image comes in later as representative of the mother,
the homemaker.
And the real person, right? The real wife, the real mom, the real woman. So it seems like in this sort of collective unconscious world, the anima crushes reality, crushes what is envisioned as a spider. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes total sense. Agree? Oh yeah, I pretty much agree 100%. There's one point I disagree with, but basically it's the simplest way that you could sort of create an image that's then going to play out in the film, right? It's sort of saying, this is the image to keep in mind, all right? And then now let's watch it play out as a story. And that's exactly how it goes. You have this limited, not infantile, but limited, immature concept, an undeveloped concept of what. So the anima here is not is not womanhood. It's this picture that's sort of developed, however it's developed, in a way has large sections carved out of it, large sections of what a woman really is carved out of it, right? There's as I mentioned, the scene toward the end, that part of sexuality is not there. It's a more objectification sort of sexuality. These women are naked, and that's about it. They don't have faces. Doesn't matter what their faces are. They've got a body. They're naked. That's part of what it is. And maybe there's a bit of a dominatrix thing there as well. I'm not quite sure, but anyway, it's very limited. And then very clearly that thing then has to destroy the thing that they don't quite recognize is the thing they hate. Maybe they haven't thought through about what characteristics they hate, but it is their wives. It's the thing that their wives maybe represent. This 50-year-old banker who feels constrained by all the responsibilities of life, by never achieving his dreams and having to be forced to get a job in the bank when he was 23 because he got his girlfriend pregnant, and her father made him get married to her, and now he has 3 kids, and she nags him all the time. And that sort of story that always plays out in marriage in this sort of modern landscape is now sort of crunched down into a single image, which is the spider. So it's my favorite thing about women, the anima, smashing all of these things that I can't quite pinpoint. I don't know what they are, but I know that spider represents it, whatever it is. Okay, there's a point there that you mentioned that I maybe we can clarify, though. So throughout history, the concept of responsibility has always been attractive, right? I mean, if you're a powerful man, I want to have sons. I want them to carry my family name. I want to have children, right? Not that men and women have always been on equal footing, but the concept of starting a family is something that you rush into, something that is an obvious next step when there's a clear myth within your culture that sort of guides the way. This is what you do next. Now it's time to have a family. Yes, I will take on that mantle. I will provide for my family. I will be a hunter, and I will feel pride in that. But I think that this is more sort of a commentary on the modern landscape, maybe the lack of a myth as a way to say, I must remain in this sort of stage just before I take the mantle of responsibility, because now responsibility to me represents a loss of freedom, represents a loss of my ability to do whatever I want, right? And somehow that's now a virtue, whereas maybe throughout history in small tribes, when all of the rituals and traditions that a tribe has that would encourage you to become a respected elder, maybe eventually, now those are no longer there. We disdain, okay, boomer, we disdain the elderly, right? We have disdain for the elderly, so there's no incentive to move in that direction, and so I have to have a midlife crisis now, and I have to go back. I have to revert to the childish, I want a race car type of thing, where the cool guy, the guy is got a motorcycle. He's an actor, a cool motorcycle helmet, and a motorcycle jacket, and he has a foot fetish. This is a picture of someone who's afraid to perforate the sort of the boundary between immature and adult, right? And so that's what I see as the source of the projection, as it were, the thing sort of in the subconscious that creates this anima is this 9-year-old who is unable to accept the mantle of responsibility, but maybe it's because there's something wrong with responsibility in sort of the modern world. Maybe it's not completely his fault. Maybe it's something wrong with the whole culture, right? Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah, and maybe there's something to the idea of there's a lot of shots of Toronto, just the the camera panning over these sort of gloomy images of Toronto, and that's the symbol of just civilization versus looking at the woods, which is chaos and mystery. Right. So yeah, I hadn't thought about it. Your question about the commentary on modernity and the lack of rituals and stuff. I hadn't thought about it that way. That's cool.
Just because
I mean,
you were saying that this is something that was old and passed down, right? So the older guys represent the sort of
Sure.
a previous tradition. And I was thinking, does it though? Because maybe in very recent history, maybe in the last 100 years, but in the last 3,000 years, I don't think that's been the case. I mean, obviously, women have been
Yeah.
treated as people who must stay at home and be mothers and wives, and that's a different conversation. But this is a sort of distortion of what it means to be part of a society, which is to be proud to become a father, to be proud to take responsibility, to be proud to move to the next stage of life. I think that's been normal.
Yeah.
Now it's not. Now none of us want that.
Well, yeah, I think maybe maybe what I was thinking is it's what they're showing in that basement is an archaic fault, an archaic sort of in the past, in the past, like that idea, that conception has always existed as far as the anima goes. If you've got this mistaken idea or mistaken ideal of what you think the feminine or female is all about, and then, like you said, in cultures in the past, there's been a way to sort of circumvent falling into that ditch or that
Right.
trap of misconceiving what reality is. But that is something that human beings have always had to deal with. So it's just an old idea
Right.
that all these guys are still participating in.
But yes, but maybe a distortion of the initiation ritual, because before, and we both have read Masks of God now. Before, the initiation ritual is the thing that stamps on you the power of your culture's trajectory, and that's what makes you the responsible adult. The Australian tribes, where you go through that horrifying period of time where you survive on the blood of other men in the tribe, that initiates you to the positive aspects of masculinity, and that is responsibility or whatever it might be. The things that are sanctioned in the tribe. Whereas this is depicting an initiation of the midlife crisis. Like, join us in this midlife crisis. We stay this way forever. You know what I mean?
Welcome to the secret cult of men, like the
old
secret
9-year-olds
society
club. Yeah, welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Well,
all
and-
have cool motorcycles.
And do you remember the other part of that Australian initiation ritual is the sub-incision, which the sub-incision was if you don't,
Let's not spend too much time talking about it because it's gross.
yeah, it's basically one of the big events in this initiation ritual in these Australian tribes is for the boys, they get this cut underneath, like on the bottom of their on the bottom of their scrotum, and I think what I remember Campbell talking about is
Isn't it the
and what I
bottom
took-
of their penises?
yeah, underneath the shaft, I guess. So,
My favorite.
talk about a Baja Blast.
Yeah.
So but the idea, what I took out of that idea is that then with the boys would always have this visual reminder of their participation and they're being made up of also female. So it's
a
almost
male
like
womb. It's their male womb, right?
it's like a male vulva, I guess.
Male vulva, yeah.
And you see that, and it's a reminder of your connection, integration, and participation with the other half, the feminine, the female part of the tribe. And I think after that ritual, that's when. So during that ritual, the men are always separated from the women, and then they come back to be integrated back with the females.
But they
as
come
well.
back transformed.
Yeah, physically.
So the membrane, so that's sort of like that initiation is passing through this membrane, and as soon as you pass through the membrane, when you return to the tribe, to normal life, everyone sees that you've passed through the membrane, right? Everyone knows.
Yeah.
But maybe it's that the membrane has grown so thick that we perceive the membrane as an impenetrable wall, in sort of the maybe the landscape now is to hold up the motorcycle as the height of what it means to be a cool guy. You know, I keep going back to that picture, but I think that kind of captured it. This, when I saw, in that shot of him on his motorcycle with his helmet, I laughed out loud. It's so perfect as a symbol for this this guy who can't see what it means to really move to the next stage of life. He is sort of in this stasis where in the movie Her, there's a sort of transformation process or growth, and here it's a doubling down on this sort of stage where you're not able to move through the membrane and you just sort of remain where you are forever. It happens once, it happens again, and it's going to keep happening, and now you're sort of getting deeper and deeper into it. And nothing around you tells you that it's wrong other than your broken relationship with your spouse.
Yeah, and so in a lot of those initiation rituals, the idea is that it's like a second birth. You go back into the womb to be reborn, but the thing that happens to you in the womb is this transformative process. And when you come back, you're birthed from the womb as being transformed. So there's that kind of thing. I'm not sure that what he experienced, I mean, you could call it a womb in the sense that underground scene it's secluded from reality, the outside world and influence. I think what seems to be going on there is rather than growing, it's sort of that stasis, that sort of psychological masturbation of self-pleasure and all that. So
it's a solidification of that state, whatever it is sort of allowing it to sort of calcify. Like this is normal. It's okay. If you were doing that on your own and everyone else was different, you'd say, "Oh my God, I can't. I should just get over it and accept the responsibility, and be the breadwinner or whatever I have to be for my family." Rather, this is a sort of looking around and seeing, "Oh, there's a bunch of other guys around here who are just like me. Cool."
Yeah, and then the creepy dude in the elevator.
Yeah, and then the guy in the elevator. I want to come back to that. But,
I gotta go back.
Yeah. Do you think he has any particular meaning when you were watching it again? Did you notice anything, or is he just a reminder that this place exists?
So he plays kind of two roles in the first. So he's actually in the first shot when Jake Gyllenhaal is going to the underground place. Jake is holding the key, and the elevator guy is behind him. So he's going and unlocking the door for himself and the elevator guy. It's the same actor. And then we get later in the movie to the elevator scene where then the elevator guy has the key for Jake Gyllenhaal, but not going into the underground scene, but he's going into the apartment. So
very interesting.
Yeah. And the whole blocking and orchestration is the same. We've got Jake Gyllenhaal in the foreground, and then the elevator guy in the background, always sort of obscured. We never see his face. He's just sort of this kind of creepy, desperate dude.
Creepy, desperate bro.
Yeah.
That's a good. I didn't notice that. Sort of the opposite. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about. I want to get to the shadow and container and contain in a second, but I wanted to ask about the other depictions of the spider. So there's the first one, the real tarantula, in the scene at the beginning, and they step on that one. Then there's the scene at the end where she shrinks up against the corner, as we talked about. And then there are two others. There's one where you see the spider sort of over Toronto. It's a yellow sky, and it's over Toronto. And then the other time, I think it's just a random clip, isn't it? Somewhere in the middle where you see a woman walking down the hallway with a tarantula head. Now, do you think those are just reminders that hey, this movie is happening. This is pretty much about this guy's psyche. It's not real. Don't worry about it. I think that's what the yellowness is sort of meant to do, sort of to make it subdued and reinforce the idea that don't worry about the factual reality of this movie. Don't worry about what's real and what's not. This is kind of a movie about the subconscious of this person. That was sort of a reminder. But I don't know if you got anything more out of the fact that there's that spider over the city. It's a very cool image, but you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that is representing his idea of the mother figure, because we see it in connection with his wife, who is becoming a mother. We see at the end when she sort of
so she was out for a walk.
So Huh? What?
She was out for a walk. That's why you could see her above the
Yeah,
city.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Just taking a stroll. Kaboom, kaboom.
the last shot is of the spider in the apartment, which is connected to Jake Gyllenhaal's wife in the movie. So we know that he sees his wife, who is also a mother, is a mother to be, as a spider.
Why is this?
And then,
Why are spiders mothers? I mean, why is that the depiction? Maybe we can talk about that.
yeah, I think I'm going to mention it in just a second.
You think you are? All right.
I think
you
so.
should. Why don't you just do it?
I could spontaneously combust, but let's wait it out.
Yeah. I'm completely there's no harm to me if you do that. So I think that would be
Right.
cool if that happened. Get lots of
That's-
views. Man spontaneously combusts on Skype. Check it
Yeah,
out.
and thanks, Bill Gates. You broke it. So then the other mother spider is, we see that spider over the city after Jake Gyllenhaal goes to visit his mother. So he's having that conversation with his mom about,
Oh, is that when it
yeah,
happens?
yeah. He's like, I saw this strange man in a hotel room and we look the same. She's like, did you take your pants off? No, I didn't take my pants off. Well, then you don't know you're the same. It's basically she's trying to dismiss this idea that there's two of you. There's no way you have a
Right.
brother. And then after that conversation, we see the image of the spider above the city. So it's kind of like, we know that the association is there. And then on top of that, to confirm that the spider is associated with the mother, is that the style of the CG spider in the movie is the same as that styling of the spider sculpture that I sent you. That there's I forgot where the original one was made, but it's Louise Bourgeois, I think is the sculptor's name.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it in Bilbao when I was there in front of the Guggenheim. It's huge. It's this giant sculpture. You can walk underneath it. You can find pictures of it. And the name of it is Maman, which is French MAMAN, and it means like mommy. And so there's that, this idea of the spider as a mother.
Did you look into the backstory about why that's called Maman? I did a little bit on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the sculptor, her mother was a seamstress and a weaver. And I think it said that the sculptor's mother was a professional tapestry restorer. So we've got this idea of weaving and protection, motherhood, and all this stuff sort of woven together. Da-dum-dum. And
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah. So the
Oh, and if I could
you can
finish off the thing. Oh, crap. So the idea, and then the idea of mother as protector and also weaver. There's this idea of women and mothers weaving life together, which weaving the threads of man together, and then also cutting the cord, unweaving things, which is in that painting Atropos that I sent you. It's a painting, one of the black paintings by Francisco Goya, and you've got the three fates, these three figures that are all female figures that are all weavers, and the idea is that they weave man's fate together. And then the last part of that is Eliade talks about female secret societies generally involving weaving. So there's that, and you think of the female secret society and weaving versus in this movie as a counterpart to the secret society of the men in this movie, where they go underground and have their animal rituals and stuff. So anyway, that's a spider idea that I
went to a coffee shop the other day, and there was a long table, and I was behind the long table, and I was I ordered a smoothie, and there was a group of women there, and they were all crocheting, and I had the same image, like, okay, this is a group of ladies, and they're crocheting, and they are sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from the guys underground. They're both doing their own thing, right? Yeah. The other thing that I was doing a little, I was familiar with the story of Arachne before, because there's a TED talk about it. Which is pretty good, but it's just the story of this amazing weaver woman who was she was very boastful of her talents. She was famous for her weaving capabilities, and then because she was boastful, she got the attention of Athena, and Athena challenged her to a weave off, basically. And
it's a weave off.
It's a weave off. And Athena, summoned some grass that she used to weave this crazy tapestry of the gods looking like, really cool. And this other lady, Arachne, they had their motorcycle jackets. All of the Greek gods, they had motorcycle helmets. They were drinking their Baja Blast Mountain Dew, chalupas, all of the above.
Chasing
cool,
down and harassing all the red
word,
station wagons.
In a word, cool. Yeah, station wagons. You had Poseidon there riding the waves in a station wagon boat, convertible. Very cool. Anyway, so she then did her tapestry. Arachne did her tapestry, and it was much better, but depicted the gods in a negative light, showed them as drinkers, showed them as cruel, showed them as basically the other side of power, which their negative idiosyncrasies.
Sound like my kind of gods.
So Athena was like, well, you win, but kabuzz, and she turned her into a spider, and she became the first spider. So now she is sort of she weaves as a creative act, but because she's a woman, she sort of represents the feminine. But also I was reading that the Hopi have a spider as the creator of the universe, as sort of the mother of the universe. And the picture that you sent of that sculpture, it looks like she has a clutch of eggs under her as well. Is that accurate? Is that a clutch?
Yeah, I think she's pregnant.
Yeah.
Well, and also if the name of the statue is French for mommy, then
those aren't cheese balls.
Those are some unbelievable stories he told.
Yeah. You want to get back to the container contained. So do you think that those concepts apply to this? We were talking about, if you haven't seen Her, or a discussion about Her, the other podcast, check that out. But we talked about how there's a relationship between a man and his wife. She is kind of still developing, and then she eventually sort of transcends her husband's concept of her, or what it means to be married to her, and they have to get a divorce because he's unable to sort of accept that the contained has expanded beyond the container. Right? He was the container. Then it happens again, where the main character has a new relationship with an OS, with an artificial intelligence. She starts in a sort of not childlike state, but less developed state, and then she quickly transcends him. And going back to this movie, there's this quote from Karl Marx where a terrible event happens twice, or a tragedy in world history happens twice, something like this. It's a
great world events.
Great world events happen twice. And then Karl Marx comments, the first time it's a tragedy, the second time it's a farce. So in Her, the tragedy is that he wasn't able to accept that his wife was sort of exceeding him, and it resulted in the collapse of their relationship. The second time, it became a learning moment for him, and he became a better person because of this sort of person being transcending him, right? There's a good ending to that story. He becomes somehow a more capable adult, right?
Yeah.
In this movie, it's the exact opposite, where at the end, when he finds the key and he says to his wife, who's in the other room, I'm going to go out tonight, he's sort of tried to solidify the peace at home with his domestic sort of situation, and then immediately relegates that to a small box in his life rather than the main purpose of his life, and doubles down on this whole journey that we've just taken, where he's tried to get out of this. The way to get out of it would be to see the events of this movie and Anthony as this sort of immature character who has this limited concept of what it means to be a grown man who can't accept the idea that he's about to have a baby and that it's going to ruin his freedom and he'll have to sell his motorcycle and buy a red station wagon. And the learning moment would there be that actually there's something more beautiful about being a man who's involved in your family and who has the genuine love of your wife who has a sexual side, and that sexual side can be exciting, just as exciting as whatever you think this sexuality is, the sort of the stiletto lady sexuality is, that this is maybe even far beyond that this person who you're in a relationship with has maybe depths that you haven't even begun to explore. You've just started to open your mind to this, that there is this image of femininity that's far beyond what you've ever known before, and you're about to step into this new world. Instead of stepping through that, he steps back and says, no, I'm going to do it again. So the second time, then, refusing to learn becomes the farce. That makes sense.
We can kind of see that he's accepted that this is going to happen again. That now comes the farce part of it. And I think it might be helpful to explain Anthony. So Adam is sort of the hero who is interacting with Anthony, but in reality, he is Anthony.
Right.
And so
Anthony is Tyler Durden.
Right. Yeah. So motorcycle guy is the shadow. And so it might be helpful if we kind of walk through that little bit. So, and I noticed a couple of things on the last watch through that are pretty interesting. So, again, the shadow is, watch her if you haven't been exposed to the idea of the shadow.
Film, not just the nearest female.
Yeah, it's not helpful. Yeah. Don't do it. Trust me. Yeah. So watch her. That's a great, and then especially watch the discussion that we had about it, because we break it down. I think we go through it pretty well, but to simplify
very well, if I do say so.
I think just to simplify it here, the shadow is whatever part of ourselves that we've sort of had to repress growing up and sort of deny ourselves. And so it remains a sort of pushed away part of our psychology that is always still trying to get out, is still trying to find expression, but because of our own responsibilities or the traditions we're brought up in, we're saying, no, you can't do that. I can't be cool motorcycle guy because I got to be responsible, or I can't be a pianist. I just want to sing, Dad, or anything like, Monty Python-esque, because you've got to become the king, something like that. But the shadow is always trying to erupt into consciousness and find expression. And the healthy way to allow that to happen is to integrate the shadow, is to not repress it and deny it, but to look it in the face, have compassion for it, and then to integrate it.
Not to annihilate it in a car crash.
Yeah, and I think that's why he's going to go through the same cycle again, because he doesn't, rather
than integration. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and so in the movie here, we've got cool motorcycle guy as the shadow, because he's and we have some clues as to why, or to confirm that he's a shadow. So one of them is when he's having the conversation.
To be clear, you're talking, just so people are aware of this, it's the concept of the Jungian shadow, not a real shadow. It's the idea of a part of your psyche that's called the shadow. Look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Do some work.
Yeah. Don't make us do everything. This is not a show for 9-year-olds with motorcycles.
Right. The initiation episode was in the last one, so you should know it by now.
Yeah. No, that was the Joker one. That was the
right, or the True Detective one. So
what
was it? Yeah. So anyway, one of the ways we know that Anthony, motorcycle guy, is the shadow is because when Adam, the history teacher guy, goes to visit his mother, like right towards the end, his mother says, like, look, basically you should grow up and stop messing around with all this stuff. You're having enough. Actor. Yeah. Don't. And I think you should drop that dream of becoming a third-rate actor. And Adam kind of like, what? And so that's our clue that Anthony is actually Adam. And then another one
It's a little
is
too obvious. And by the way, you love blueberries. The blueberry thing was a little too in your face. Like, yeah, all right, I got it with the actor thing. The blueberry thing is a little too much.
yeah, she's like, and those blueberries, eat those. And so, which does kind of set her up as kind of a dictator, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe.
So, and then there's another part in the movie where Adam, towards the end, when Adam has entered the apartment of Anthony, has put on the clothing and everything. He sits down and he's reading this magazine. It's called Cycle magazine. All right, and then he gets up and he walks over to the bookcase.
Is it Unicycle magazine or?
Yeah, there was a clown with juggling, Mountain Dew cans, and when he gets up to go look at the bookshelf, there's all these books about history and dynasties, and sort of. That. Yeah, it's like Canadian history. There's one called The Art of Peace.
Canadian history.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Well, specifically, Canadian soldiers in World War II. So then we come back to that fascism and dictatorship idea. And one of the books is called Christ to Coke. And I looked it up, and it's about imagery and symbolism and sort of that kind of stuff. So it's like the director is putting,
trying to speak to you directly.
Yeah.
Watch this. I got to make sure I get that in there. Got to clue him in.
Yeah. And so anyway, then we get the idea that, okay, so this is the home of maybe a history teacher, but he's got kind of this side project of, man, I wish I had a fast motorcycle. I wish I had this. So we know that Adam is in fact Anthony. Anthony's just sort of the shadow part that the wife maybe has been living with for so long.
And that's an understandable part of think about someone like Alexander the Great, who was kicking ass at age 21. I mean, the incredible things that certain figures in history did, I think, really represents I don't know if it's specifically a masculine thing, but I mean, traditionally, it's sort of the have children who carry your name. That is a way to live forever and show feel like you've accomplished something. There is something about achievement, accomplishment, a competitive nature, gaining territory, being Alexander the Great and conquering the world by age 26. There's something about that I think has sort of been grandfathered in our era, which is you are supposed to stick with the status quo. You're supposed to go to college, and then you get a job, and then you try to get promotions, and then you try to get more promotions. But everybody knows that for a lot of people, that existence doesn't have a lot of meaning in it. It leads to mid-level managers who spend most of their time in the office watching YouTube videos or whatever. They don't have this sort of burning Alexander the Great-ian drive to conquer, right? But it's still there, but it has to be sort of then it has to pop out elsewhere. It has to maybe take the form of this dream that I once had to be an actor, or this whatever it is, any sort of side project of I want to be recognized, I want to be special, I want to achieve something. That whatever that drive is, I think that's there, and I think it's a totally natural thing. It's something that we probably all have in part, and maybe the landscape around us, the social landscape around us, kind of discourages it, and so it's more likely to create these sort of not childish but unexplored paths. We don't explore them. We don't take those roads because they're unsanctioned and we have responsibilities. So it's not to say that there should be sort of blame placed on this character as this sort of man-child, but at the same time, he doesn't really have the ability to see what his next mature step should be, because for whatever reason his vision is clouded. He can't see through it, right?
Did you notice there's a couple of times when we see it, but when he's walking home from work, there's this the street art these spray painted stencils of this businessman in revolt. Like he's got his fist up in the air as though it's a bunch of business, suits, a bunch of suits like in revolt. This kind of going along with the theme of dictatorship and revolt, and visually portraying what's going on in his mind. Like something is in revolt. The shadow is in revolt against him, or like you were saying, the things we have to push away want to get out. They want to revolt against the things that have pushed them away.
Right. And going along with that, just the shadow thing, the foot fetish. I want to mention that as part of it. So,
yeah.
I was doing a little reading about it, and I don't know this for a fact, but it seems like a lot of fetishes pop out of early childhood. The thing that is associated with something that happens in early childhood, nothing sexual necessarily, but when the sex drive develops, it has this sort of thing from early childhood kind of tacked onto it, right? And so that, in a lot of people, plays out as a foot fetish. Everyone knows that mine is a red station wagons, and yours is Baja Blast Mountain Dew. When you see people pouring a Baja Blast, I know what happens.
Watch out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Hit
a lot
the
of
deck.
people. Yeah. But the foot fetish is, I think, just reinforcing the shadow, that this is a part of maybe himself, that this is the part that belongs to the shadow, and this is why it's connected to when he sees the girlfriend on the bus, he looks at her feet, and why he's the one who goes to the club, and why that's the thing that crushes the spider. That is associated with Anthony, the cool guy with the motorcycle, the 9-year-old, the undeveloped, the person who developed this sort of quirk. Not to say there's anything wrong with a foot fetish, it's fine, but to develop this quirk from infancy. And he is a person, in a sense, still with infantile traits, if that makes sense.
Can I expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, you can.
Sure, I guess.
If you want to.
I got time. So there are a lot of background imageries that are going on to play to that point. And first off, sort of the idea of imposing or big women, which is associated with the foot fetish. There's a documentary about the artist Robert Crumb. Have you seen it?
What's it called?
It's called Crumb.
Nope.
You should. It's fantastic. It's so good. It's almost like a character study on specifically the shadow that we're talking about right now. All the foot fetish and the sort of larger than life women and the larger than life idea of the feminine that we're talking about. Like Crumb is a real artist who is that's been his entire life. And there's a documentary by Terry Zwigoff, and it's fantastic. But the idea of large and imposing women. So we already know that the first shot of the anima as the larger than life female crushing the real Spider Woman that we talked about earlier. So there's that. We've got the visualization of the mother as the spider imposing above the city. There's a scene where Adam goes to the video store to pick up a movie. And if you look at when he's at the counter talking to the guy, it's like he's talking with the guy, and behind him on the wall there's a poster, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Oh, that's interesting.
So and
very interesting.
And then when cool guy motorcycle guy follows the girlfriend to work, there's these posters inside of the bank, and they're all these women, giant women with their feet on all the buildings. It's sort of like taking control of the city and that kind of thing. There's a poster.
Really interesting. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, and there's a poster inside of Anthony, motorcycle guy's apartment, and we see it when he's sleeping with his pregnant wife, and it's for this 1957 film noir called Man Afraid. So the idea of this man being afraid of women, that it's sort of it inhabits the most intimate part of his being, the part he shares with with his wife. And I think the story of that movie isn't really male female related, but it's just there's this word. The words are right there behind him. You know,
Right.
man afraid. Um, and then in that
That's
same
good
shot,
filmmaking.
yeah,
It is.
the same in that shot where motorcycle guy follows the girlfriend to work. When there's a shot where you see uh, the girlfriend is in the foreground sitting at a desk working, and then there's Adam or Anthony sitting outside. And in that shot, the way that it's framed, she's very large and he's very small, and he's also contained within like the crook, that her posture, like the crook of
Force,
her
yeah.
arm.
The force
And
perspective makes him look like a tiny person being crushed. Yeah.
again, big woman, small.
Genius. I didn't
Yeah,
notice that. That's great. I'll have to go back and
it's
watch it.
it took me 4 times. So,
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
um,
I'm going to look out for those things the next time I watch it.
and
All to the point of the male psyche feeling trapped by the homemaker, the mother, the weaver.
yeah, the other human being that he doesn't understand, that he hasn't
Yeah.
yet equated himself with, because he's still trapped by this infantile perception
Yeah.
for whatever reason. I mean,
And
Anthony's father isn't in the picture, so who knows if that's on purpose or not.
well, there is an absence there that's interesting. The absence of the father is interesting. It's interesting that there is when she tries to interact with him. I mean, the girlfriend, the mistress, I guess when she tries to interact with
Her.
him. Yeah, there you go. He almost he doesn't have. He can't give her he doesn't give her the time of day, really.
Mm.
He's focused on what he's doing. When she asks him a question, he's kind of, you know, I'm just grading papers or whatever he's doing. He can't even give her the time of day. So that sort of paints this picture. It helps to reinforce this very limited view, right, of what this is a completely sexual thing, and everything else is beyond his vision. He's sort of in this landscape where a lot of things are obscured and there's much more that's there.
Mhm.
Toronto is there, but this yellow haze is sort of covering a lot of the buildings, and it's sort of like a video
The
game when you're
the wires.
when you're flying over a video game landscape. The landscape creates itself as you go, right? It's kind of like that, except you have a computer with a pretty bad graphics processing unit, and it doesn't populate very very far outside of your diameter is limited. And so that's why that yellow haze over Toronto is really interesting, because Toronto is not a smoggy place. That's something
Yeah.
that's obviously in post. And then the spider within the haze sort of walking around but kind of obscured.
And did you notice, this is something that Chris Stuckman pointed out in his explanation, but we also repeatedly see the tram wires in the city as though they're the webbing, the net that are controlling him. And then right after he's leaving work, after the first time he teaches class, at the beginning of the movie, he's on the tram and he's on a track. It's like he's contained inside of this narrative that he can't get out of. Like his
Right.
life is on track to finish out this, what will become a farce.
It's this and it's also the socially sanctioned track that is preventing him from his more Alexander the Great maybe thing that he would love to do with his life, but he can't, because there are expectations and there are responsibilities and there are things you just do that are sort of sanctioned. You're a professor, you do certain things and you don't do other things, and that's the way it is. Why do you have aspirations to be an actor? What's wrong with you? So the only thing that he has, which is sanctioned in a way, is his affair with this girl or other women, and then that is probably reinforced by this underground club, and those people probably do the exact same thing. So he feels like, okay, this is something that allows me to take out this urge that I'm not able to express anywhere else, and I can see a few people around me at least who do the same thing, so it's all right.
Yeah, and maybe I think that'd be a good segue into talking about the idea of dictatorship and that whole theme in the movie, and control.
So let's tie together dictatorship, control, and marriage. I think those things are very much related. There's some purposeful messaging there, I think, in the movie. I mean, why is it that he talks about?
Yeah.
Right? So I think you can start with your interpretation of that. control, at
Yeah,
least.
sure. Yeah, I mean, you're the married guy
Right.
in
Well,
this
I can.
relationship, so
Yeah.
you'll have the authority on that
We're
one.
not married. I'm married to someone else.
Right. um, so the dictatorship thing, it just seems like to me, it seems like his conception of marriage is a dictatorship. His conception of a mother, of what a mother is controlling, because
Mm.
his mom, I think she's kind of controlling the way that she talks to him and sort of demands things of him. It doesn't seem, she kind of cuts him off in his sentences and says, eat, you're having enough trouble sticking with one woman, eat those blueberries, drop your third-rate actor dream. So she seemed, whereas his wife, she doesn't really elicit any dictatorial characteristics. She just seems like
You
a
seem very
sane human
nurturing.
being.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially at the end when she, says like, come back, like I want you to stay. And then
But it
the
doesn't matter
aunt,
though.
hmm?
It doesn't matter because just like the foot fetish, you don't if that's imprinted somehow from infancy for whatever reason, so is
Yeah.
the concept that you have about what womanhood means. Uh, uh,
Yeah. And I
Mothers
think,
are dictators. Okay, so that's the concept, and
mhm,
even if his wife doesn't exhibit those characteristics, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe
right.
it's just like, okay, well, this is what a mother is, though. So my image of that,
Exactly.
sort of like how people have with a lot of anxiety issues. There's nothing about the real world that's causing anxiety. Most anxiety issues are just because people don't know how to properly process reality so that the
Yeah.
anxiety doesn't exist, right? Because there can be anxiety or no anxiety from that situation. It's the same thing maybe for him. The mother is the dictator. And so
Yeah.
if that idea is in his mind, doesn't matter what his wife does or how she acts or how kind or understanding she might be, doesn't matter because mothers are dictators.
And that's exactly I totally agree 100%. That's the point, I think, is that he is projecting his feelings about his biological mother onto his wife, who is now about to become a mother. Whereas the third woman in his feminine trifecta is the girlfriend. She's not a mother. She's just a single, career professional human being, female in the world. And
Yeah.
so she doesn't really, she, um, but that's exactly the point, is that he's projecting the feelings the things that he hasn't been able to integrate or undo that he feels towards his mom. He's now projecting towards his wife, who's going to become a mother, and versus his girlfriend, which is merely a sexual object. It seems that seems to be their dynamic. Um, I was trying to see if the idea of the anima having a dictatorship over him is another dictatorship. So we've got he views the mother as a dictator, but then in some ways is his anima kind of a dictator in the sense that the anima won't let him grow up to become like an adult, the
Maybe
responsible.
the combined anima and shadow, right? It's the anima plus the fact that when he's around his shadow, when he's around Anthony, his hands are shaking. He can't
Yeah.
find his words because he's acknowledging willingly the superiority of the other of the shadow.
Yeah.
It like puts him down on his knees. He doesn't know what to do
It's a
around it.
dictatorship of the shadow.
Yeah. And maybe a combined shadow anima sort of thing. Combination of the girlfriend and Anthony together sort of cripple him, and he has a side of himself that may be ready for the next stage of life, but these two things they don't allow it. It's already been imprinted. He's already been sort of his mold has already been punched out, and he doesn't have the capacity for growth maybe.
Yeah, and it seems, and that would go back to that idea of that kind of protest art on the graffiti on the wall with the businessman with his fist raised in the air, like he's trying to protest his condition, or at least there's an idea of there's the cauldron is bubbling and the lid's on too tight. It's got to explode. These things have got to get out. Something has to change. The things that have been repressed are going to destroy the person they're inside of unless they're exposed and integrated.
And maybe there's a container-contained thing there as well, but maybe in a sort of perverse way. So rather than his wife, who seems like a very compassionate, kind person with a lot of, depth, who she's not depicted in any way negatively at all in the film, would be someone he could grow with as a person, rather than her being the container and him the contained in any sort of up to down way or a hierarchical way. He is projecting on himself the status of contained. Like, she's containing me. She's not. But he says to himself, I'm being contained. I can't handle the totalitarianism of my marriage, if that makes sense.
I can't handle the pregnant women.
Right, exactly. But it's something that is projected outward onto the world, as though you were in you were doing VR in a giant open warehouse, but because you're in VR, the walls are sort of in your eyepiece, and you look around and you see all the walls, so you just accept them as there, when in fact there's nothing there. And I think that's the case with a lot of anxiety issues. People have anxiety because they project walls in places where no walls exist. And I think in a lot of marriage issues, people are projecting walls internally that don't exist. Right?
Yeah.
I'm being contained by this woman who is going to force me to do A, B, and C, including responsibilities of fatherhood. And there's no mention from his wife of, you can't stop pursuing acting, right? There's no mention of that. But he's projecting probably something like that onto her because his mother says things like that, right? So, and from personal experience, I think it does make a lot of sense. I can imagine being very frustrated as a married person in that sort of relationship. When I was thinking through the decision whether or not to get married, I was thinking about a couple of important things. The first one was, is this person going to, say, do something that's going to prevent me from wanting to express myself? The most important thing for me is doing my own thing, right? Working on my own projects, creating something on my own. And I just can't bear the idea of getting a regular job. When I was 25, I promised myself, I was in a flight on the way to South Africa, and I just sort of suddenly had this thought, I can never have a job again, and I never will. And since that time, I haven't. And I hope I never do. And this was before I got married. And we had this long conversation, and I explained this. I want to, build what I get. I want to get something that gives me, I want to do something that gives me purpose. And is that going to be okay? And if it's okay if you think that's not okay, but let's talk about it. And it was a real conversation that we had, a long conversation. And that conversation was the basis in part of the decision. And it wasn't just words, because in my relationship, we are very supportive of each other's growth, right? You do your thing. I'm not going to tell you to go out and get a job, because as long as there's some money coming in some way, whatever. And we've supported each other. There have been times when she was more supporting me, and there have been times when I was more supporting her. The first 2 years we got married, she wasn't working, I supported her, and then it kind of went the other way for a while. And it's really interesting to have that, but it comes from mutual respect and sort of acknowledging the other person as a partner rather than a container or whatever, some thing that's there to obstruct you. And so I think that the sort of the experience in my own marriage is something I can use to compare with the person in this film as someone who's, because he's projecting these walls outward, is never going to escape this labyrinth that doesn't actually exist in this case. I mean, it might for some wives, but it doesn't seem to be the case for this movie. It's a projection, right?
Yeah.
Maybe of his shadow self, or whatever it is, maybe from his mother. And the other thing I wanted to mention about marriage is the conception of marriage as a place to fulfill all needs. And I think that that's another, I don't know if it might be a bit of a critique of the modern marriage structure. It used to be in maybe some tribal societies, or earlier in history, the function of marriage had different functions, but it wasn't the sole source of meaning and satisfaction. Sort of the modern romantic Hallmark Channel conception of marriage is you're free, and then when you get tethered to this person, you're now bound to this person, and your happiness is derived entirely from this person. Your sexual needs, your intellectual needs, your emotional needs, whatever needs that you have will come from this person. It's probably time to find new friends, probably married friends now, instead of your old poker buddies. Now it's time to find new friends and sort of move into a new paradigm, right? This is sort of a modern idea of what it means to be married. And so I think it might be sort of a critique of that notion too, because he has that idea of what marriage is, or that idea sort of just is in the culture. But that's the cause of the high rate of divorce, because you can't derive all your meaning and all your purpose and all your needs and your happiness from family or your husband or your wife. It's just not realistic. It's not a realistic expectation. You don't get everything from that person. It's never going to happen. And so maybe to me, it was kind of a subtle prescription for maybe a slightly more mature concept of what it means to be married. Not to say cheating on your spouse is a good thing. That's not what I mean. I mean, why do we have this concept of marriage being this totalitarian regime where you are stuck to this person? This person is responsible for the money, and you're responsible for making the money, and these things are divided up in, you get bread on Tuesday and you get potatoes on Thursday, maybe Russia under Lenin, the Bolshevik Revolution. They started doing the bread lines. So anyway, that's just something that came to mind when I was watching the movie, of this sort of half-formed, probably immature form of the concept of marriage, which probably needs to evolve.
So carrying on with the idea of it being a dictatorship, he mentions that Rome figured out how to control the populace with bread and circus. And then when he's teaching class, he mentions the bread and circus kind of thing. And then, entertainment being the thing that distracts you from into self-expression and that kind of stuff. He mentions after bread and circus, censorship. You can't, literature is suppressed, and all that kind of stuff is just suppressed. So it's almost, there's something about maybe the individual coming through and finding, being able to complete, integrating the shadow so that you become a complete individual within a society, rather than just being a tool of the society, or like a gender rolled member of society. You're the man, you do this. You're the woman, you do this.
Yeah.
So, like you talked about that, at one point your wife was the provider, but then at the other point you were the provider. Like, you were the more major support, maybe financially, I don't know. And then at the other time, she was more of the financial support. But that role of supporter was never confined to only the man, like we envision traditionally. So, I don't know. I was trying to figure out where's the dictatorship in? Is it that the females in his life are the dictators, or is it that his conception of those things is the dictator? Well, it's not that the females are; it's that his conception is his mind is the dictator.
I think saying dictator points or makes it sort of about the person. It makes it about the Stalin. It makes it about the Pol Pot. Whereas if you just say totalitarianism, or something like that. Then you're focused on the way that it feels to live in something that, okay, it's been prescribed by a dictator, but you don't interact with the dictator. You don't take commands directly from the dictator. You just live in this structure that is totalitarian. And so you get bread on Tuesday and potatoes on Thursday because that's that's built into the structure. There's something wrong here because I want to eat potatoes on Monday too. No, you can't. You're just a number. You're just a collection of labels, and whoever sets the rules has set it up so that you need to fulfill functions X, Y, and Z in order to play your part. But that part doesn't happen to involve any of the Alexander the Gradian tendencies that are innate in humankind, or at least the drive to find the individual. Yeah, not even male. The individual, to find expression, to find meaning, to find purpose. So I think that's more what it is. I look at it more as system-wide rather than pointing at a person. Although his mother may represent a dictator too.
Yeah, and I think when I think dictator in his case, it's his mind, because the whole movie is about his mind and his conceptions, it seems. So, and the idea of entertainment as distraction. Let me take a sip of water, and I want to mention that because
is it tonic water? Do you just drink tonic water? Are you afraid of getting?
It's vodka. Who are we kidding? I would be the Alexander the Great of Stalinist Russia if I could pound vodka like I pound Baja. Mm-hmm. So the idea of entertainment, because I wondered if the way that the director juxtaposes sex with him. So we hear him talking about teaching in his class about dictatorships and that kind of thing, and we see him having sex with his paramour, the anima. Yeah. I think it's her anima or his anima, and almost in the sense that sex is entertainment and a distraction from, well, this way, it's a sexual relationship that's built upon only entertainment and maybe vapidness. In contrast to the more relational, maybe meaningful sex that he has with his wife at the end. So did you see that? Did that stick out to you at all? Sort of because he's talking about entertainment and all that stuff being used by dictators to maintain control. And then we see him in this relationship, his interactions with his anima, his girlfriend, the paramour.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
And it's a distraction from the meaningful process of individuation, or getting outside of seeing women as dictators, or motherhood or fatherhood as this dictatorial, containing, totalitarian system that you slot into.
Right, as though he were sort of there's a bigger reality out there, but if you plug your ears and close your eyes, then you can fool yourself into not seeing it, and that's what's played out when you're being entertained, or you're watching gladiatorial games, or you're, in this case, maybe banging a Quebecian mistress. Is that the right word? Quebecian, is that a word?
It might be Quebecois.
I thought
that's the name.
That's the
language.
That's the language, but is that the person? Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who knows? Who cares? when you really think about it.
Yeah, who cares when you don't know?
Yeah, who cares? If I don't know something, I don't care.
That's right. So the idea of entertainment. All right, I wanted to follow that vein a little bit, because did you notice the name of the video store he goes to?
Mm-mm. I didn't notice a lot of these small things, I guess.
Watch it 3 more times and then it'll be like, oh yeah, duh. But it's called Queen Video. Mm-hmm. So again, we've got sort of that the regal idea: king, queen, dictator, ruling, kingdom, powers, all that kind of stuff. But it was interesting to maybe think about the role of entertainment in this movie alongside the ideas of illusion, the feminine, which we need to bring up the line that I told you about, which maybe connected this whole thing to Peterson a little
Oh, yeah,
bit.
we can talk about that.
Yeah,
What was
that's
the
kind.
line?
Uh, let's see. I got it written down. Let me get to it. Um,
When
man.
you pull that up, the reflection on your glasses, it looks like it makes me appreciate anime, because often you see in anime, you see the guys with there are always those reflections on people's
Yeah.
glasses. It looked just like that. Great. If any of you are
Yeah.
listening to this and not watching, make sure to check this out on YouTube, because just for the reflection.
Yeah. It's like I'm a nerd and Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, it's like that. That's what it reminded me of, actually.
I I think it's man.
So, just
Okay.
as
Okay.
a little background here, Matt pointed out earlier to me that this guy's a college professor, and he lives in Toronto, and this is about Toronto, and the movie is clearly about sort of Jungian, uh, very things involving the psyche, and things that stunt maybe this man's development, and that's sort of the bread and butter idea of Jordan Peterson, who was also a professor at, I think, the University of Toronto. Is
Yeah.
Canadian, at least. I think he's in Toronto.
Yeah. It's University of Toronto.
University of Toronto. And so there's the maybe possibility that it's based on him in a way, or at least meant to evoke him. And I was trying to find if the writer of the film, not the book, but the film, was perhaps maybe one of his students, because he's the right age, but I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah. The screenwriter is from Spain, which the whole conversation about dictators and then the incorporation of the spider image, because there's one of them, there's copies of it, but that spider sculpture is in Bilbao in front of the Guggenheim there. It's just, a convergence and a confluence of a lot of coincidences maybe, but the line is, so anybody who wants to check it out, you can listen to it at, I think the 18-minute mark is about where this starts, but Jake Gyllenhaal's character Adam goes back in to start teaching class, and when he's talking, it sounds like the stuff you've heard him say before, but then the audio starts to fade out. And if you turn it up and listen to it as the audio fades out, he says something to the effect of that a creative act of memory is a product of the feminine, is always colored by emotion. So when I was listening to that, I was thinking, wait. That sounds like stuff that Peterson talks about.
Yeah.
All the time. He talks about male, feminine, order, chaos, dictatorship, and all these things that we've been talking about just constantly. So it just seemed kind of interesting that this also takes place in Toronto. It's a build. The guy teaches, I think he's a history professor in the social sciences section of the university. There's a sign that says social sciences in the movie.
I think it's a very good possibility. A very good possibility.
Yeah, and the director, he's French Canadian, so it doesn't. And then on top of all the Jungian, the emphasis on Jungian ideas and Eliottian and Campbellian ideas, it's just, I don't know, it's too much for it not to be more than a coincidence. But
I agree.
So the idea of, and not that creates or breaks the movie, it stands on its own, but the idea of entertainment and going back to Queen video. So in Hinduism, the goddess Maya is the mother of illusion, and she does three things. She obscures the truth, she projects an illusion which obscures the truth, but it also reveals the truth, in the sense that once you understand that what you're seeing is an illusion, then you can see how it obscures the truth, and then that reveals the truth, because it's like I think we've talked about it before, but oh man, this magical phone I have in my pocket, it does all this stuff. But then when you learn how it works, it's not as maybe mystifying as it was before, because kind of like when an invention or something novel becomes mundane, the illusion of it kind of wears off. And then, if you're smart enough, you can go create your own illusion because you've learned how illusions work, right?
Yeah. Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah, same kind of thing. It's an illusion. So it's interesting in this movie, the illusion of Adam's illusion of who he is starts to break down when he goes to Queen Video, because he goes to Queen Video and he picks up a form of entertainment which introduces to him his real identity, right? Because in the entertainment he sees literally himself, not figuratively himself, but literally his own identity. And so that's sort of the first key that starts to unlock hopefully undo his neuroses of being dissociated from his shadow and all the real complications.
It's the initiation to the possibility of growth.
Yeah. And so
it's the birth of Samantha from her. Maybe.
Yeah. How so?
Well, that's the thing that triggers, that's the thing that initiates, isn't it? Is that the moment? That's the moment that initiates the pathway. The awareness is created, and then you begin down a path that hopefully leads towards some sort of exegesis of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Well, in this case, finding out he has a doppelganger. Well, there was that there before, so far down in the shadow that it was unknown. But now at least he knows it's there. This is the initiation to the path that's going to lead towards some growth of some kind. But it doesn't go that way because it's a tool cover of Jungian ideas, not a Sufjan Stevens cover. Yeah.
So the call to adventure.
I'll buy that.
So the call to adventure in this movie, the call to adventure is the thing that happens in your daily routine of life, which it ejects you from the round of just repetition and mundane existence. So the call to adventure here is the guy in the teacher's break room, the teacher's lounge, that says, "Hey, do you like going to movies?" And then he's like, "Oh God, what's this dweeb talking to me for?" That's the refusal of the call. Yeah, it's like that's the refusal of the call. But then when he actually embarks on the adventure because he's bored, he rents that video, "Where there's a will, there's a way," kind of like the subconscious is trying to break out into consciousness. Where there's a will, there's a way. It's going to erupt somehow in the way least resistive. Then he finds this video of himself, and he's finally, like, he has, I think, 3 identities in this movie: Adam, Anthony, and Daniel, the pseudonym he uses as an actor. So he's trying to pick apart his own identity. And how does he start that? Well, he sees himself with a different name in a movie. Right.
It's sort of, so that then...
So entertainment as a tool to actually, it's like it is Maya. It is exactly what Maya is and functions as. It obscures reality because entertainment is entertainment. It's a falsity. It's a myth. It's a narrative that's not real. At the same time, art imitates life. Life imitates art. So to some degree, when we can understand it, kind of like what we're talking about here, then it can actually reveal reality to us, so that what it obscures and what it projects are kind of broken down, and then we can understand it and talk about it.
Which is also sort of the function of stories in general. I mean, you derive your you gain insight from, let's say, people gain insight from reading the Bible every day, or reading the Quran, or your prayers, or the stories that are related to, if you live in an older society, the stories that the elders tell, right? You glean things from those stories that you can try to apply here or there. What would Jesus do?
And so it's interesting to think about. This is kind of, I just thought about this, but we just talked about at what point there seems to be this Peterson connection, and with that line that any act of memory is creative and it's feminine. So when he starts remembering who he is, he goes to Queen video, like that. There's this sort of and the idea of Maya is a feminine idea. So anyway, it's just kind of cool to wrap all that stuff together. And
that's a very interesting point. But the other thing is that so then bringing that toward the quote from Hegel, the first time is a tragedy, the second time is a farce. It's as though the first time created this sort of shell that obscures, right? Or a haze that obscures. But it's a fairly thin one. And so the call to adventure, the thing that causes him to go rent the video, that allows him to see that there is this doppelganger, this other self, allows him to break through that shell, that obscuring whatever it is, mist, fairly easily, as though this is sort of the first time this has happened. But then, once it's done the second time, it seems likely that that shell might get thicker. So if the shadow is always going to find like magma beneath the crust of the earth, it's always going to find a way out, right? There's a thin part here that's a hot spot or that's a volcano. The shadow is always going to find a way to sort of worm its way to the surface, right? But when the sort of obscuring layer is very thin, it's easy for him to actually try to confront these things, to see if he can move through this sort of new experience, this adventure, in the call to adventure, this journey, this hero's journey, productively. But once that first failure happens in the hero's journey, you're supposed to have a first failure. And then the first failure is the thing that sort of initiates you to then learn a new power that you can then use to slay the dragon or the monster or whatever it may be. Except this time, it seems to, the failure, he's allowing it to, by seeing the spider in the corner, essentially create this very thick sort of the sarcophagus over Chernobyl that's going to prevent it from happening or make it much more difficult if, again, the shadow rears its head and tries to find a way to the surface. It seems like he might be too far entrenched now because it's a farce. Now it's a farce. And so maybe the spider at the end in the room is sort of saying, it might be too late for this guy. I mean, here we go again, but this time he had a shot. If you have one chance and you don't take it, it's really a shame if you the second time it's going to be a lot harder because the neural structures, the pathways are going to be fused to be in the weird spider sex club and have the same habit pattern. The habit patterns form, and so I think that's what the spider signifies.
Yeah, I wondered.
That's why that look on his face is not just that look on his face is so complex, because I think it's supposed to register all those things. It's like a tragedy, a disaster, that I missed the boat here. This was my moment to do it, and I didn't do it. And then also,
well, we know he's been unfaithful before,
right?
Yeah,
right. Well, that's why he's breaking through the shell. That whole thing was breaking through the shell the first time, but now it seems like the habit patterns are fusing in a way.
Ossifying.
But it's sad. There's a sort of a pathetic resignation on his face in a way.
Yeah, it's almost like there's no point in trying again.
Be the motorcycle guy, I guess. Yeah, because I can't control myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have another donut. Why not?
Yeah.
I was trying to sort of reconcile the ending because his face is. I think it took a couple of viewings for me to sort of reconcile what the expression on his face was
It's
in
good acting.
accordance. Yeah, yeah, that's the Jake Gyllenhaal superpower. But and reconcile it with the philosophy from the beginning of the film, that exactly what you just said, that the first time is a tragedy, the second time is a farce, because it's like, yeah,
What can I do?
whatever. This is
Yeah.
stupid. The first time it had meaning, but now that we're doing it again, the whole thing just is stupid. So
Well, not stupid in that I am aware that it's stupid. Stupid that there's maybe a brief recognition that I just missed my chance, and
yeah,
I see myself beginning to cascade downward. And but once that cascade happens, then I won't even know it anymore, if that makes
yeah,
sense. You
yeah.
will go back
And
to the beginning of the movie where he's doing it all over.
right. And it might be interesting to try to put that discussion up against the idea of Parzival. Do you remember that the night of the Knights of the Round Table, the romance stories of the Grail? Did you that I sent you a talk with
Yeah, I listened to it.
Campbell? Yeah. So
It was dope.
In Parzival's story, he makes it to the Grail Castle, the ultimate goal of his journey one time, but he's sort of too ignorant to realize how to accomplish his goal in the castle. So he gets sort of kicked out of it. And then he spends like the next, I forget how many years it is, trying to get back to the Grail Castle to get another shot at achieving illumination, individuation, and sort of the goal of his life. So I don't know, in order for Jake Gyllenhaal's character to achieve what he should have achieved the first time, it's going to be a sort of like Herculean task
Right.
that
That's what I was
we
trying to
don't know.
say. Maybe you just said it better than I said it. I spent 5 minutes talking, but you said it perfectly there. It's Herculean now. The sarcophagus
Yeah.
instead of the candy, the hand dipped ice cream candy shell.
Right.
It's a sarcophagus. It's going to be much harder to break through that this time. Herculean.
Yeah.
And it sort of also reminds me of that story of, I don't remember who it is, but the young hunter who stumbles into the place
Yeah.
where the nymphs, many nude nymphs are bathing, and it's who?
Is it Aphrodite?
Might be Aphrodite.
It's Artemis.
Artemis. And he, as an undeveloped male, he doesn't know how to deal with this, right? So, he is on the same plane, maybe, there. And so what happens to him is that he gets turned into a deer because he's not able to, he can't rise to the level of Artemis. He might be, if he were mature enough, if he were responsible enough, if he were whatever enough, if he had the right attributes, the mental strength or whatever it is, he might have had Artemis as his mate, right? But
Yeah.
she's so far beyond him, he can't even comprehend the characteristics that would allow him to be on her level, as it were, whatever those characteristics might be. And so instead
His
of
own dogs
achieving
consume
that,
him.
he gets eaten by dogs as a deer, right?
His own dogs.
She zaps him, and he gets eaten by his own dogs after being turned into a deer by Artemis. When he had a chance, but he didn't know how to use that chance.
Right.
And it's the same thing here. The act of his wife showing him that she understands his infidelity and is willing to give him another chance, and then comes to him when he's on the sofa. They have sex there in a very sort of, as I said, it's a very loving way, right? It's a different style than he does with the girlfriend, right? There's
Yeah.
something very tender about it. I don't know how to describe it. It's very tender. It's very loving, and that sort of is the Artemis, right? She's showing him that, or in a way, that this is the sexuality that Artemis has, the full-on sort of female sexuality that's more mature, that is her own person. And
It's very human, like
Right.
a whole
It's a
complete
whole
human,
complete human.
not
That's-
just
yeah.
male, not just female. It's like the marriage of opposites, the mysterious wedding, the alchemical thing, Mysterium
it's
Conionis.
If the woman with the stilettos crushing the spider is 2% then this is the other 98% of it,
Yeah.
of femininity or being what it means to be a woman. And maybe that is also symbolized by the spider, because maybe the spider is a caretaker who is very sensitive, because a spider sits on a web and is very sensitive to other people's emotions. So the spider who sits on the web can feel any vibration on the web and knows what's going on. And there's sort of these abilities that a spider has that we can barely comprehend. And if we fully appreciate those things, we benefit from those things, right? To fully appreciate your spouse, for example, and value them as another human being who has their own interests, their own goals, and their own nature that's not the same as yours. And that moment is her sort of saying benevolently, I'm going to forgive you for this childish shit. I get it. You're frustrated. You feel like you're getting cold feet on being a father. But this is my act to show you that I get it, but let's move forward. And then,
I want you to stay.
And then for a second there, he sort of is on board, right? There's a moment, there's a little bit after that where they're in a really good place, and then he gets the key. And getting the key to the club is sort of like Dunkin' Donuts releases pumpkin spice Krispy Kreme. Well, Dunkin' Donuts Krispy Kreme. What am I saying? They're two different brands, but you get it. They release a new one. It's like, I achieved something, but now I'm off the wagon.
The Dunkin' Crispy Bucks.
Yeah, exactly. The Dunkin' Crispy Bucks vanilla spice donut with Bavarian fudge inside and
orange mocha frappuccino.
There's no way to refuse that. Because if he hadn't received the key, then he would have stayed on the path, right? But
yeah, I've been trying to. I haven't quite been able to verbalize or come to a complete sentence about what is it. Why is it that the key does that? Because única is Portuguese and Spanish for only, and I don't know. Does it mean only you or only? I couldn't.
You've seen Breaking Bad where Jesse meets this girl who's really nice. She's really cool, and she's sober for something like a long period of time, many months, I think. And she had been a drug addict, and then she almost is able to say no to him, but finally she's at the door. I think she has a key in her hand, and she's about to walk out, and then she turns around and goes into his room, and that's the beginning of her death, because it's that one thing, and it's because the pathways have formed. All of the habit patterns are there in place, and all you have to do is tip over one domino, and it's all going to fall. And so if he were going to create a habit pattern or forge a new pathway of be a good husband, be a good father, then that was the time when it would have happened. But right at that moment, a domino, this one single action, one domino is pushed over. And since all of those habits are already there, since all of those sort of infantile pathways are already formed, he's been through this before, everything else is just sort of cascade failure. The nature is taking its nature is just playing out in his mind at that point. But the key is just a domino, I think.
Yeah. There's I think at the beginning of The Ecstasy of Being in one of Campbell's books, he talks about the idea where the word symbol comes from. And it's a key in the sense that I think in Greek trading ports, when you pulled into port with your haul or your wares, you would go to the port and you would be given there was a ledger it would get marked down of what you brought in, and then you would be given the other half of this key in the sense that it's like a puzzle piece, or a puzzle, and it's only of two pieces. So the guy at the harbor keeps one piece, you keep the other, and then when you come back later to retrieve what you're trading, then you bring your part, and the other person has their part, and when you connect it, then you get access to this load or this cargo. So it's sort of a unique key that only works for you. And so that's the only thing that I could really.
And Anthony has in his home a complete picture of himself with his wife, right? And
Yeah.
Adam has only half of that picture.
Hmm. Yeah, was that his wife? Because it didn't look like the same
Oh, maybe
girl
it's not.
to
I don't
me.
know. Why would he have that though?
Yeah, I know. On the shelf, when I was looking at it, it looked like there was that picture that we see, which is ripped in half at the beginning of the film, and then there's a. I thought maybe it was his sister or something, and because there's another picture down below it, and I think it's the same other girl, just a friend, and then there's a picture of his wife near that, but I couldn't tell. But
Yeah.
the key thing still holds because he's got half of it, and then when he gets home, he finds the other half.
Half of it.
Yeah, because at the beginning of the movie, when he's living in his own sort of secluded apartment, he's got that his picture is ripped in half,
Oh, right. Yeah. I
and
thought
then
you
when he
meant half
goes,
of a key. I was confused for a
oh
second.
no,
Any more
but
coffee? I'm slowing down.
yeah,
I was going to ask about. So you mentioned him at his own apartment. Why he doesn't answer? He never answers his mother's phone calls.
yeah.
You think that is supposed to goes back to the dictator thing, or that there's some sort of complex there, as though when he's in a certain state, when he's in Anthony mode, that he almost doesn't see it; it doesn't exist, or I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe he just doesn't want to interact with his mom because but I think, I mean, when he's in her, she's obviously very successful. She's
That's
a
what I was gonna
creative.
say. It's sort of like
But-
one of those. It's trust fund kid, and your parents control your life. And if you ever run out of money, they'll send you more. Don't worry about it. But they also have some sway.
Right. And in that scene when he's at his mom's house, there's a bunch of paintings behind it. So she's a creative,
Yeah.
kind of like the mother creative of the sculptor who did the spider sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but she's kind of just telling him the whole time, feel this way, don't do this, don't do that. You should grow up. Thou shalt not, just the whole time. So, I mean, I'd
She's-
want to escape
yeah.
that too.
She seems to have leverage, though. Her leverage might be that she is very successful, that she probably has a lot of money. He has a dream that might allow him to have all the freedom and fame he wants, but that dream hasn't been realized because he only has bit parts in small movies. And his role as a teacher is not something that is particularly valued or even esteemed in, we don't say, oh, wow, you're a teacher, you know what I mean? A college professor. So maybe he doesn't have the recognition that he would want to have. And because she's maybe successful, I would imagine that when he, for example, maybe he was in his 20s, he couldn't pay rent sometimes, and she would just say, I'll send you the rent, don't worry about it. But then that comes at a cost, and the cost is that you owe me something in a way.
Yeah.
So if I say, don't feel this way, or you love blueberries, or whatever I say, there's sort of a deference that's expected of you, because whenever you couldn't do what you're supposed to do as an adult, I stepped in and took care of you. And so I
Yeah.
am the protector still, in a way.
Or when the provider becomes the dictator
Yeah.
because it provides so much.
Yeah. Over provision. She's used to him kind of listening to what she says and not really worried too much about how he feels. Not the supportive mother, not the mother who really listens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a hard time putting into words what the point of the car crash was. And the thing, because trying to think about it in Jungian terms, it seems like the shadow is interacting with the anima to me. And so I'm like, well, why is, and when, if that is true, if that's what's going on when we see it, then when the anima interacts with the shadow, there's this destruction. There's a destructive aspect of it, and I couldn't quite. What did you think?
I saw that as So if I try to visualize it, the car crash is an attempt at annihilation, like quitting smoking cold turkey is likely to result in smoking in the future, rather than other ways which might allow it to be permanently gone. So annihilating the shadow, annihilating the anima completely, is not annihilating them in the sense that they're actually gone, but it's sort of trying to dispatch them to the depths so that they're totally gone. They're gone now, rather than integrating. Right? Integration would be, I have these urges. I love feet. Whatever it is. I have these tendencies. I have this drive to have recognition. I have this drive for people to know me. I want to be a famous actor. I have this drive for a motorcycle. Whatever it is, those sorts of things. To recognize that, to integrate it as part of his personality would have been the correct way to go. So it's sort of like saying, this is what you don't do if you want to mature and develop, right? What you don't do is attempt to destroy, because you're not going to destroy it. It's going to look like a car crash, but you can see on the windshield of the car there is a spider web. The pattern on the windshield is a spider web. The cracked glass looks like a spider web. Right. So that's sort of like, actually what you've done is you've pushed it down for a while, but it's going to come back up, and probably with more force than before, right?
You're still caught.
Yeah, you're still caught, for sure.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the only stuff I've read in Jung is about first you deal with the shadow, and then you can deal with your anima projections, which is what is kind of going on in the movie. He gets introduced to his shadow first, and then he sort of understands how he sees females.
Does he though?
Yeah. Okay. So here's this is another thing we didn't talk about. There's a scene where he's in a dream state again, and he's seeing the naked woman walking down the hallway. Yeah. Right. And it's not it's sort of a mix of the anima and the spider. So there's sort of this transition or transformation going on. Yeah. In his perceptions. Yeah. And then at the end, he sees a female as a full spider, his wife. Right. So there's that sort of transition, blending of perceptions.
Well, I think what Jung was saying, is a prescription for maybe how it's done. You deal with this, and then you deal with that. Right. It's sort of, you do it in sequence, but maybe you don't try to put them together. Don't put them in the same car and smash them into a barrier. Right.
And that's, you were talking about the concern about framing masculinity and femininity in the movie. In that conversation in the car, that's when the anima, the girlfriend, says, "You're not a man," and he's like, "What? I'm not a man. I'm not a man. Get out of the car." And then they drive into that pylon, but it's the feminine assaults his masculinity.
Yeah, and then he calls it quits. He checks out.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't think that's meant to be any sort of conscious thing that's going on. I think that's, again, most of the movie is sort of just like marionettes playing out a drama happening deep within the psyche. And these humans that we see in the movie, yeah, all right, they're really there, but yeah, not really. I mean, it doesn't matter. The lines are blurred. We can view them as representations of what's going on inside this guy at this very pivotal point in his life, when he's about to have a child, when he's about to be a father, which is the crux of the transition between free, young dreams and not free responsibilities. Support your family. That's that critical thing is right there.
And that's what society compresses us into, rather than having a full. Well, it maybe which drives us nuts, but maybe the antidote to that is to have the best of both worlds, not all of one and none of the other in either direction. But why not be the teacher who's a dad who drives a motorcycle to school, or
the family who travels around the world together.
Sure. Yeah.
They work remotely. They do freelance. I know people who do that. I know a couple with a daughter. They homeschool their daughter, and I mean she studies with them, and they travel all around the world. They spend 3 months in one place and then go to another, and they both work remotely.
That sounds cool. I want
Sounds
that.
sounds dope.
That sounds dope.